One of my campaigns ended with the PCs being sort of having a hand in the end of all reality. Where I took it from there, basically, a number of the player characters ascended to being gods as a result of that. What we did is we did a whole series where everybody was playing the god that they had become, and then I was playing sort of an evil god that was against them, and we had a mini game of building a new game world. I've always been a bit dissatisfied with
the old Dungeons
and
system.
Dragons and Pathfinder's magic system, because there's an itch I feel I need to scratch for myself with magic that is more creative and open-ended. The ability to have the more traditional, like think Doctor Strange or the Christopher Paolini books with Aragon, right? That magic is a much more free form. There's still hard rules. It's still like a Brandon Sanderson-esque hard magic system, but it's free form enough that characters, be the PCs or NPCs, can either use structured spells from the rule set or they can invent something. I actually found that I think we overcorrected and it became too freeform and too overpowered.
Yeah.
And, it's worked well so far, because every game that I've ran with this magic system, how does this system actually balance if people other than my trusted friends want to play it? So I was trying to think of ways that I could make this magic system work so that you could have a mixed party. I really wanted to see if there was a way to make this something like this system work in a mixed party where people that weren't casters wouldn't feel like
eclipsed,
totally useless.
Welcome to WorldJam number 2. I'm your host Greyscale, and with me we have Wizard from our Discord server, who's an experienced DM, and we're going to nerd out about his world for a bit. Let's see where we go with this.
Yeah, so in terms of format, yikes. Do we have a format? No, we're just trying to work, we're just basically ad hocing it. I know there's going to be a lot to go through, so in terms of basically we're going on for as long as we like. Your world, then. I know it's a big open-ended question. Where best to start on it? What are we looking at?
Yeah, well, I mean, the genesis of it, so I've been playing D&D as a game master for probably 11 or 12 years at this point. And a couple years ago, I want to say 3 or 4, one of my campaigns ended with the PCs being sort of having a hand in the end of all reality.
Oops, yeah, so, the PCs broke it.
They screwed up a little bit.
Excellent.
And where I took it from there, basically, a number of the player characters ascended to being gods as a result of that.
Oh dear.
And then I ran a mini campaign with there's a game system out there called Dawn of Worlds.
Ooh.
Just a little homebrew, like 3-page thing I found online somewhere. I have no idea who made it, so I can't credit them. But it's basically a really loose world-building rule system. So what we did is we did a whole series. It was like 7 or 8 game sessions where everybody was playing the god that they had become, and then I was playing sort of an evil god that was against them, and we had a mini game of building a new game world.
Ooh.
Right? And the Dawn of Worlds rule set sort of sets up, you go through ages where the first one is about geography and landmass, and it slowly gets more granular as you go. So what's really fun about that is it helped with a lot of the initial tedious world building, like what do your continents look like and that kind of stuff. But also my players are a bit more invested in it because there's elements and even some secrets that they placed, and now, as we set up the more traditional style of Dungeons and Dragons adventuring campaigns in this world, they're playing different characters, but the religions and the gods and the sort of high level pantheon of Teramore is something that was created
It's
by
all
them.
theirs. I think I might have found Dawn of Worlds.
Yep, that's it. That's exactly it. So yeah, I mean it did a really good job, and so that's sort of how Teramore was born, and from there, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different directions we could go in, but fundamentally, what Teramore is at first glance, it's a fairly vanilla D&D medieval fantasy world. So, the same sort of vibe as you would get from a official Wizards of the Coast world. Teramore is that, but it's just mine.
Yeah.
So a lot of the stuff you would expect to be in any Pathfinder Dungeons and Dragons game is probably somewhere in Teramore. But there's also other things that are in Teramore that are not. So we have a couple custom races that we've created over time. One of them was actually created by one of my players in that world building session.
So it's like basically a sacred species of one of the gods or something.
Yeah. So one of the characters that became a god was a vampire.
Yep.
And a very high-powered mage. And her character name was Aurelia, and so she became the goddess of magic in Teramore, and placed a bunch of restrictions on how magic can work and what it does to try and prevent its abuse. So she created like the Aurelia's laws of magic, which are the fundamental tenets of that religion. But it also informs how some of the sort of the physics of magic and the lore of magic works in Teramore. So this is sort of one of the big aspects for me is I'm always very magic heavy in my campaigns, and the more complicated, the juicier it is to me.
Yeah, all the nice kind of like meta magical, like that nuts and bolts.
Yes. So like I have a full chart that I can share in a little bit here. That's the Planar Architecture, and like the rabbit hole is very deep and ominous indeed. So yeah,
very, very much here for like working, because we did prior to this, a while ago we did have a bit of a chat about the magical system. So I've got a bit of I've dipped my toe in slightly on that one.
Yeah.
And
so where we are now, I've got one campaign my main group is playing in Teramore right now. I'm starting next week. There's a local tabletop club for my region I'm a part of, and I'm starting a kids game. So it's going to be a group of 8 to 14-year-olds, 6 of them, that will start. We'll probably get a session 0 in before Christmas, and then start in earnest in the new year.
Once everything's all going.
Sorry?
Once they're all primed and excited, they go, no, now it's Christmas time.
Yeah, exactly. And it's going to be fun. It's a good mix of, there's a couple of the kids have never played before. A couple of them are quite experienced, so I think that'll be good. So they'll be somewhere. So I like having multiple campaigns that are all happening at the same time. The world is huge, so they can interact or not interact to whatever degree I or they want. But it just breathes a bit of life into it when events for one group can impact another group.
Yeah. Don't think I've run two things in the same setting at the same time, but I have definitely referenced things that previous groups have done.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's like, oh yeah, normally in the setting there would be one of these, but thanks to one of my previous parties, there is not.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to get into some of the magic stuff or look at some math.
I'm happy to go wherever. Why not? If we're here, let's talk magic.
Okay, so the root of the magic system I use is from a game called Mage: The Awakening, or at least that's what it started as 10 years ago.
Yep.
I've always been a bit dissatisfied with
the old Vancian
Dungeons
system,
and Dragons and Pathfinder's magic system because there's an itch I feel I need to scratch for myself with magic that is more creative and open-ended. The ability to have the more traditional, like think Doctor Strange or the Christopher Paolini books with Aragon, right? That magic is a much more free form. There's still hard rules. It's still like a Brandon Sanderson-esque hard magic system, but it's free form enough that characters, be the PCs or NPCs, can either use structured spells from the rule set or they can invent something
on the fly. I recall I mentioned it very much reminded me of Ars Magica as well, which very much has as you know, the spells by rote, and also I don't have a spell exactly that would do that, but I know how I would do it.
Yeah.
So I would kind of like also I would like control wood or something to basically to make the door open for me.
So how Mage: The Awakening does it is they have 9.
It's the spheres,
they
isn't
call
it?
them spheres, but they're magic schools. And you rank up in each of those spheres, and you get, for each rank you have, you get a D10, and you can roll a pool of D10s for the spell you're creating, and depending on what numbers you get in that dice pool, it determines whether you do or do not cast the spell, and to what degree it's successful or to what degree it smacks you upside the head.
Because reality doesn't like being prodded.
Yeah. So I've gone through a number of iterations of our homebrew rules. We started very close to Mage: The Awakening. Right now I'm working on what we're calling sort of our version 4, because I actually found that I think we overcorrected and it became too freeform and too overpowered.
Yeah.
And it's worked well so far because every game that I've ran with this magic system, for one, I've got a really mature and cohesive group of players. We've been playing together for a long time. Nobody's trying to power game or whatever. It's about the story and the fun. So it sort of fundamentally works because of that.
You've basically got the system of trust working both ways there.
Yeah, exactly. But with this new club that I've joined and some other games starting, I was really thinking about, well, how does this system actually balance if people other than my trusted friends want to play it? And really, objectively, it's not balanced whatsoever. And so I was trying to think of ways that I could make this magic system work so that you could have a mixed party. All my games so far, everybody in the party has had some level of magic, right?
Yeah.
Whether they're a half caster or a full caster, there's been something. So I really wanted to see if there was a way to make this something like the system work in a mixed party where people that weren't casters wouldn't feel like
eclipsed,
totally useless.
Incidentally, if you like WorldJam, want to be on WorldJam, or simply enjoy just listening to nerds just talk crap about world building, follow in the style of the great Werewolf Promoter, like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you want to. And there's a bunch of other stuff down there below as well. Go have a look.
I see the problem with that one. I know that when I was playing, I tended to gravitate towards stuff that wasn't generally caster based because everybody else had already taken casters while I was late. So I had to pick something that would have skills that might be useful when the magic ran out.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So I'm in the midst of that right now. And I think I've found a way to make the system work so that a person coming into play in Teramore can play a standard wizard or sorcerer or cleric, and use the rules as written without it, and that's fine. And it works with the lore, because all of that's just role play, right?
Yeah.
And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm calling them tiers of mage, right? So there's 3 sort of power levels of magic user in Terramore. So the highest one is the one that my players are used to playing, like all the previous campaigns, this really high-powered, demigod level magic abilities. I'm calling them ascendant casters.
Mm-hmm.
So they will continue to exist. It'll just be that's a tier of rules I can use for my big bads, a lich or a dragon rider or somebody who, for some lore reason has really, really crazy amounts of world-bending power, right?
Beyond the
They'll be
ken
really
of
scary.
normal mortals, that kind of...
Yeah, but it's okay that they're broken because there's a reason that it's kind of broken on a power scale, right? Then what I'm going to do is have a custom class that I make. That's the working title. I'm just calling it an Aethermancer because Aether is the in-lore word for magic in Teramore. And so I'm working on building a class that is pretty bare bones except for the casting. So they don't really get anything else. Really low hit die. They may even have D4s as their hit die. They're going to be super squishy. They don't get a lot else, but they get this creative magic system to play with, and there'll be some restrictions on them above and beyond what has been played with in the past. And then some rules that make it so that standard caster classes can be used with this a little bit. So there's, in the Dungeon Master's Guide for D&D 5th edition, there's a variant rules system for instead of using spell slots, you use mana.
Yeah.
And so basically there's just a formula for converting the number of spell slots you have into mana, and everything else functions as normal. So all the casters in Terramore will just use that.
They'll just have the mana pool.
Yeah, and so the 2 magic systems then sort of work alongside one another. So yeah, I mean, I don't think we want to get too into the weeds of all the dice rolling details of
No.
overcomplicated magic system here.
No,
but that's sort of the gist of it.
It would be, we're probably going to more working on like concepts and ideas, I suspect, because otherwise things will get very, very dry.
Yeah. Everybody wants to suffer. My players tolerate it barely as it is.
You sit and go, and then you could do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and a lesson I'm really trying to learn as a DM is not to lore dump on people, right? I think as somebody doing a lot of world building, you have so much nuance and so much detail in your head as you're building and spending all this time, in LoreKeeper and World Anvil and all these other services that are available, that you want to sit down at the game table and just gush to your players about it, right?
Yeah.
But really trying to let it be until it becomes relevant and they ask for it.
Right? Definitely. The most I would probably want to give under these circumstances would be very, very broad strokes. Let the players' minds fill in a bunch of the detail, and then when it comes to, you want to go to this place, well, Okay, let's have a little explain. Here's a couple of images. Here we go. What do you think?
And
Or ask them, what do you think it smelled like?
yeah, I think that the way I internalize it and think about it, just to make myself feel better about not sharing, oh, there's this cool detail that I, the AI came up with or I came up with that's in my wiki documents. The way I come to terms with the fact that my players don't find that out because they didn't ask the right question, or it just wasn't relevant, is as the game master, all of those details being solid in my mind, and all of those details being included in lore with LoreKeeper, even when those details don't become known to the players, they inform everything else, and the fabric that they weave together of the world and the story is what makes it feel real and cohesive.
The little details are like, right, yes, this now feels internally consistent.
Yes, exactly. So it doesn't matter if all of the details come to be part of the role play. Just the fact that as the dungeon master you understand it, it raises the bar of the immersion.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it doesn't matter if they don't know about those little fish pies that are strangely indigenous to this part of the world. You do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. That involved a conversation with. I think that was a conversation I said. I think I had to call my mum up and say, short of food dye, what would you have to put into pastry in order to make it look almost black? And we came around to seaweed in the end.
Yeah. So I've got a map of Teramore. This is just one of the continents, but it's the one that's mostly fleshed out. I'll throw that in.
Yep.
Chat here.
Yep. All the visual aids.
So this is a nook.
Yeah. Yes. I saw this pop up.
Yeah. So this is sort of the largest continent. Let me see if I've got one that's the full thing. I'm sure I do.
There were other. This was just one of the continents that came about as a result of what was it called? Dawn of Worlds.
Yes. And yes, here we go. That one. So this is the full. Oh, is it too big of a file?
Wait a minute. You could also share your screen as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I will do that. So this is sort of the rough draft of the larger world map. We've got a nook, and then
wow,
other continents. So this is the map that was created by my players initially. It was we put a bunch of huge pieces of paper on the floor in the middle of the session, and they threw dice around, and these are the shapes the dice took.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was one of my players' ideas as we were sort of thinking, oh, do we want to spend a ton of time, drawing this out and having people take their turns raising land? And they said, why don't we take like
bunch of dice,
500 dice, and throw it on the map and see what happens. And this is what happened. So
I am totally down for that. Yeah, that's brilliant.
And then we took I can't remember, but I believe we took one of my players is an artist, and she drew a smaller version of it, because obviously we had this huge map. And then I imported that into Wonderdraft as a height map, which is what this started as.
I can see you've got like mountain ranges, another bit passes up here and there.
Yeah.
The mouse pointer is just bouncing around, going ooh things. And is that where you've got the radial lines spanning out from? Is that one of the poles then we have there?
So the radial lines are centered on a city called Nimbus, which was founded very early in the timeline. It was sort of the initial seat of civilization in Teramore. I have quite an expansive timeline, and our dating system is based on something called the Sanguine Empire. So because the calendar and everything was invented by them, so the dates are all before the Sanguine Empire or post Sanguine Empire. And the 0 date is the collapse of their civilization. So the creation of the world is somewhere around 8,000 years before the collapse of this empire. So the founding of Nimbus is sort of a mythical, who knows exactly how it happened or when it happened, but it's an ancient city. And so that's why I've got all of those lines focusing on it. It's sort of this initial point.
It's basically the kind of like center of civilization in the world where all other civilizations will draw. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, gotcha.
So then we've got off and open. Yeah, no, I'm just pulling up another map.
There's more.
Okay, this is the map that I put in.
But with
chat.
zoom in now.
Yeah. So this is that peninsula of Nimbus.
And Nimbus itself. It's ruins now.
It's ruins now, yeah. So about 15 years before the current game date, which is 1168 post-Sanguine Empire, there was some magical storm event, the natural disaster that nobody really knows what happened. It destroyed the city, and that effect is still present in the city. So very soon here, I am going to be running a game. Are you familiar with there's a D&D adventure called Dungeons of Drakkenheim?
Yes.
Okay, so Nimbus is going to be Drakkenheim.
So it's going to be basically kind of like a huge ruined city come mega dungeon.
Exactly. So I've never run a pre-written adventure before. It's something I've always wanted to do. I've always just done the open world thing, which I enjoy, but this is a different aspect of the game. I'd really like to do it. So this is my way of doing that, but putting it in Teramore. So I'm taking Dungeons of Drakkenheim, I'm rebranding and naming a lot of the stuff, but I'm going to use the ruins of Nimbus as Drakkenheim. So, and instead of a meteor that is like an eldritch infused meteor, which is what happens in Drakkenheim, I'm going to have this magical storm. And it's really cool because in Drakkenheim, there is a substance called delirium, which are these magical crystals that are shards of the meteor, and they have all these strange effects on magic and on... It sort of has this radiation effect where all of the creatures that are in Drakkenheim have mutated, and there's this haze that prevents you from taking a long rest. So all of these things folds really nicely into a concept I have in Teramore, which is, again, stolen from Mage the Awakening. It's called TAS, or Tathium.
Yes, TAS is basically it's quintessence but material, if I remember rightly.
Yes.
I only remember this from Ascension. You see, I didn't
Okay,
play much.
gotcha.
Yeah, but I remember. But TAS, yeah, which also actually was mentioned in Ars Magica, because at some point I think White Wolf had the license for it.
Yeah. So TAS in my magic system is quite important. It has to do with enchanting. It has to do with magic. It's a concept that comes up again and again for my players.
Mm.
And when I was reading Drakkenheim and started reading about this delirium, I just thought, no way.
It's that.
It's just too perfect.
If it's too perfect, don't question it.
Yeah. So basically, a ton of the stuff in this pre-written adventure, I can just change the names of it, and it works really, really well.
Yeah.
With the TAS and the city and the disaster, and then I just rename. There's in Drakkenheim, there's 5 factions that are sort of vying for influence and control of the city. Well, pretty much all of those factions have a equivalent in Teramore pretty naturally.
Yeah.
So I just rename them that. I can take the same characters that are already pre-written. So it's going to work really well.
And you've got, and they've all got basically little kind of like encampments in and around what would now be Nimbus then.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, what I have been working on today and right now, surrounding this is, I will switch my screen.
Doobie-doo-boo. This sounds like something we can both jump off to and start kind of brainstorming then.
Yes,
something you've been working on today.
So this is Wonderdraft.
Aha! Hello,
so
Wonderdraft.
What I did about 20 minutes ago is I took the map that we were just looking at, and Wonderdraft lets you do a detailed map. So you select an area and you pick how many times you want to zoom in.
Okay.
So whenever I do region maps, I do a 4 times zoom. So this map is simply
the bit from down there.
Of what we were literally just looking at.
Yep.
Then I select all of the symbols for trees and mountains and everything, and I can select them all and scale them down. So because otherwise you would just look like a zoomed in version of what we just had, but I want the scale to feel bigger. So I've literally just scaled it down and scaled all of the labels down. And so now it feels like a very big map of exactly what we're looking at, but all the proportions are the same. And so this is where I'm at now. So I was just having a conversation with LoreKeeper about names.
Right.
So I think this might segue quite nicely into not only some world building, but also how I have overcome LoreKeeper's biases towards crappy, tropey
generic names. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I have fought with this for quite a while, and I think it was my single greatest frustration with LoreKeeper was the Elaris effect.
Yes.
Or anytime you ask it for a town name or anything, inevitably it'll call it the Whispering something.
Yeah. Right?
Like,
no. It's like give it a better name.
Yeah. So what I've done is, generally when I'm having conversations, and actually let me switch it over to LoreKeeper.
Yeah,
here.
hop in, or can pop it over to my account, my world, whichever. Where have you gone?
Okay. So, I have a lot of conversations.
Yes, yeah. Don't Tidal Lock and Crux look rather like this for me as well. So
Yeah, and this is with quite a lot deleted. I generally delete anything. Like I've got this one here today. That's what I'll do typically. Is if I just have a one-off and I know I don't need to keep it long term, I'll just call it today and then I'll delete it when I'm done with it. But you'll notice that there's a lot of chats here with region names.
yes,
So what I do, and so I'm in the Nimbus chat right now because obviously I was using Nimbus, and I set up not only where it is.
mm-hmm.
So I put in some references, on the southeastern corner of a nook. It's a peninsula that extends eastward, a little bit about what it is, setting the tone for the conversation. Because I may well have had descriptions of Nimbus before, but refreshing LoreKeeper to prime it for the conversation is really important if you want good quality output.
Yes. I think it's what did Nate call it? I think it was something like the context window.
Yeah. So then the very next thing I do, because
we have an Elaris.
Yeah, see? So I asked it for some names, and it immediately gave me Lake Elaris, Whispering Cove, Glimmering Bay, Feldrak Peaks, which is like the same 7 names you're going to get everywhere else.
Yeah.
So, I got annoyed. And what I did is I've done this with pretty much I'll just scroll down. I've done this with pretty much every region. When I'm designing the high-level flavor of a region, one of the core things I do is what is the linguistic root of the feel I'm looking for. So, and this works better. So, like initially, I tried to do it with fiction examples. So, I would say Dwarven, like from Lord of the Rings, as a reference, or naming conventions like the Alethi in Stormlight Archive, from series that I enjoy. But what I found works a lot better is real world references.
Yeah.
Just because the data set that's going to be available to LoreKeeper or any AI, if you ask for something, ask it to emulate ancient Greek, for instance, the body of text and reference material that it has is an order of magnitude larger, right?
Yeah, I noticed. Yeah, straight in the Speddies. So yeah.
So you'll see here, I have set Nimbus to be based on a primary influence of ancient Greek and a secondary influence of Byzantine. And all of a sudden we get Locus Selene, Thalassa Locus, Irene Lake, Astraea Locus, Hesperatus, Helican Heights, Aegis Bay, Elysian Cove, Etherian, Nymphaea, right? And there's an internal consistency to the naming as well.
Which we like.
So it's not just a bunch of random stuff, right? So, it's not perfect, but it's better.
Yeah, and this is a jumping off point.
Yes, and really, if somebody is looking to do world building, you can't expect to take AI and just treat it like a random name generator.
No.
If you just want random names, go to there's a couple websites out there that have phenomenal libraries of name generators. But when you use AI or LoreKeeper for it, you can get that consistency with less effort. And so what I'll do is, I'll say, give me 10 examples of river names.
How many of them in the original language also mean river?
Right. And LoreKeeper is going to be slow today, apparently.
Oh, come on. There we go. Yep.
Right? So some of them will be copies of, so it's already suggested Elysian for something else.
And the Styx and Lethe itself.
Yeah. But you pick from this, it took 2 seconds, and now I can probably get 3 or 4 out of this that,
Yep.
if not being good as is, might give me an idea, right? So,
That's the one.
I've done this with city names. I've done this with, actually, specifically when I was setting up some of the lore for my planes, the layers of reality, and I wanted to rename. I had all of these words from Mage the Awakening that still had, and I really wanted to white label that so that it didn't still have that taste of it. So one of the only things I kept was TAS, just because it's so ingrained in the lexicon of my players. But
because even if you change the name of something, they'll probably still come back to referring to it as TAS anyway.
Exactly. So I just, instead of calling it TAS, the proper name is Tassium, but the slang name is TAS, right? So I just decided, whatever, I'll keep it. It's not like I'm selling this and making money off it or anything. But, words like paradox, Tellurian, the gauntlet, these are all words from Mage for...
Mage, Werewolf, World of Darkness in general,
planar travel and how magic works. And so one of the challenges I had was coming up with names that are replacements for that sound cool.
Yep.
And you can't really use a name generator for that, because there's no name generator for esoteric magical concepts.
No. The best you can probably get off doing is kind of like look around for books in this in that kind of vague sphere, which are not as easy as you might think.
So one of the big things for this was my magic schools. So I was using the 9 spheres from Mage the Awakening. Matter, forces,
life, correspondence. Is entropy still one of them, isn't it?
Entropy is one of them, yeah. Time, right? And that all sounds fairly, in my tendency to overcomplicate everything, that all sounds fairly mundane. And also it's White Wolf intellectual property. So part of this magic system rebuild is I'm expanding that to 12 spheres.
Okay.
I'm calling them schools so that it lines up with D&D's rules.
Yeah.
And so I needed to come up with new names for all of these. Some of them being just a renaming, and the sphere still does the same stuff, but some of them being entirely new things. And so I started a fairly long conversation with LoreKeeper about words in Latin that mean, X.
Yes.
So, and then I started playing with those words in conjunction with Mancy and sort of those sciencey words about magic. So, I went and I'm just looking for...
Yeah, because spirit would strike me as kind of like an ethermancy type thing, wouldn't it?
Yes. So what I ended up coming up with spirit was spectromancy.
Ah, that also works.
Right? I'm just looking for the chat here so we can... Oh, I'm not sharing my screen anymore. Okay.
That's okay. Pop it back on whenever you feel like it.
Okay. So I ask it for the list of the spheres of magic as we have them, and this is in my lore, so LoreKeeper knows, these spheres of magic we were using before.
Yeah.
I said, okay, we're updating the rules. We need to change them to this. And so we start getting the new list of 12. So I split entropy into 2, chaos and order.
Mm-hmm.
I split life into 2, life and death.
Yep.
And I split prime into 2.
Ether and null.
Ether being one of them, and null, which is a concept in Teramore that I thought should have its own sphere, which is, the anti-magic. We won't get into it, but it should have its own school.
I'm always happy when people start introducing the void to stuff.
Yeah. So I just said then I wanted a chart for summaries of what they are. Give me a chart. Then, started going into, I was just brainstorming, right? So I said, give me a list of, and I copy and pasted this from a previous chat, of all these different spell schools. You can see there's a crap ton of them.
Yeah.
It put them in a table for me, a very long one. And then I was sort of playing around with, are there any other schools of magic not included? It gave me a bunch of stuff that wasn't super helpful. Oh, that's the end of this. Where is the chat for? Did I delete it? That would be sad. But I didn't need it anymore, I guess.
Now he hit stuff that I do. Is like, did I write this down? Where did I save it?
So this is New Schools of Magic. Yeah, I'm talking about like what's involved in them here. And then, did I name them in this, or did I? No, I think I already had the names. Anyways, I'll just go through. Basically, as I said, I just worked with LoreKeeper for an hour and a bit on, give me some Latin words that are synonyms or related to mind, right? And, and after a while, the cool thing is it understands the context of what you're trying to do. And so you don't, in the single conversation, you don't need to prime it in the same way for every subsequent school, right? So I do all the groundwork for the first one, and I say, okay, we're going to do another school now. Here's the basis, and boom, it jumps to step 4 instead of you having to walk it through all the steps, which is really the strength of really any AI. So the names that I ended up settling on, they're all based in Latin. It makes them all cohesive with one another. Is nexomancy is correspondence, so the nexus
from
of things,
from
right?
Nexus, yep.
Yeah, spectromancy for spirit, cerebromancy for mind.
Yep.
Luxomancy for forces.
From light.
Yeah, because it's energy.
I suppose, yeah.
Fabromancy for matter, fabrication.
Fabrication, making, yep.
Yeah. Sorticism is order and fate, and the divine stuff of the gods kind of gets in there a little bit.
Oh, I'd imagine so.
This one's a mouthful, but I love that it's a mouthful because it's chaos. Anarcheonomy.
Yeah, okay, yeah, there we go. Me misreading it.
Yeah, anarcheonomy. It's a bit awkward, but I love that it's a bit awkward.
I can see. Basically, you'd have practitioner specialists in that school deliberately being slightly trollish.
Yes,
it's like
it's just a bit officious, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and also it's slightly different from all the other schools.
Yes, yeah.
It's like, why do you have to be different?
Yeah.
Because we are.
And then the last one that's here was from Time, and we called it chronomancy. But hello. But the what I found as I was developing the schools more is Time always felt just very one-sided. Everything else has nuance to it and is a wider body of lore. And then there's Time, which, if you're trying to balance out characters taking feats in the various aspects or schools, why would anybody pick this unless they want to cast Time Stop?
Or perhaps if they basically, or if you want to kind of like funnel stuff like haste in there.
Yeah, and there ends up being very few spells that really fit with this. So what I did is there's within, I call it the planar architecture, but it's sort of how the planes are set up in the world. beyond just the prime materium, which is, what you think of as the map we were just looking at.
Yep.
And there's this concept in it where there's time travel, but there's also, you can travel sideways through alternate versions of reality. The Marvel Cinematic Universe does this with the multiverse, right? It's the same idea. And so one of my planes is called Reveris, and that is the plane that through which you can transit between these parallel versions of reality.
It's kind of like an interdimensional buffer zone.
Yeah, and so what I ended up doing is I took time and said, okay, well, if time is moving forward and back on this surface, and the parallel reality stuff is moving left and right on the compass, why don't we just make the whole compass this school of magic? And so it broadens it out, it gives it more utility, and I changed the name to Transiturgy.
Nice. And you're basically levering this cosmic liminal space between realities.
Yeah.
Oh, conceptually, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and then if you picture Transiturgy and the plane of Reveris as this flat compass with an X and Y axis that is time travel and inter-reality travel, then the Z axis, the up and down, is how you travel to other layers of reality or other planes in the traditional sense. So the astral, the ethereal, the elemental planes that you traditionally have in D&D and worlds like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that axis in sort of this metaphor is nexomancy. So it's a different sphere entirely. So when you're conjuring something, say you want to summon a fire elemental, that's nexomancy, and you're conjuring it, from another plane.
You'd be reaching up the Z-axis through the interstitial realm to pull it through into yours.
Yeah, so it creates a metaphor for people to conceptualize how this sort of works, the framework of it. And on that note, I'm working on this.
Excellent.
So this is, there we go.
Yep.
My planar architecture map that's in progress.
I gotcha.
So you see prime materiums, which is all of those versions of reality layered on top of each other. Then layered with that, Aethix is the plane of magic. It's not physical. It's not really somewhere that you travel to, but that is where mana and the energy for magic comes from.
And then
the nullum is kind of like the void. It's the opposite of that. It's also layered in a unsubstantial way over the prime materium, and it's the opposing force to Aethix. So the two of them, and this is a really cool concept that one of my players came up with in that Dawn of Worlds game, where and it's cool because she's the super quiet, introverted player, right? But then once in a while she has these really cool ideas that just change everything. And so her concept was this force of null. So the force of Aether and the force of null are both layered, and they push on each other. So most of the time they're in balance. And when they're perfectly in balance, magic works in the prime materium as you would expect, in the standard way. Spells cost the normal amount of mana, they're the normal difficulty to cast, everything's baseline. But that balance between these two forces can fluctuate in different places of the world. They can fluctuate based on influences from, maybe somebody casts a spell that draws the balance to be more magical. And so it gives me this really creative tool as a game master to say, okay, well, you've traveled into this cave system, and one of the things about this cave dungeon is null is really strong here for some reason, and magic is way more difficult to cast.
Yeah.
So you got to spend twice as much mana, or the DC to roll on a conjure check is 5 higher, right?
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Or for instance, jumping back to your map, where was it? The storm that struck the city itself. It could have been from a massive spike on the ethic side of things.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so it's just, it sort of circles back to what we were talking about the fabric of the world, and all of these little details, I don't want to dump them on my players at once, because as, clearly we've been talking for an hour, I can go on and on and on about this.
We've barely scratched the surface.
But what it does is it establishes how you can link game mechanics and lore through roleplay, so that everything is consistent.
Bingo.
Right? And when I have the overly complicated metaphysics of how magic works in my world, because it's rooted and I've got all these charts and all of this kind of stuff, I can maintain consistency in how I describe magic and effects working. And when one of my players does something tomorrow versus 6 months from now, the result they get from the same actions, should, if I'm doing my job right,
they should be fairly, they should be consistent because
and be explainable.
Yeah, and if you have to give an explanation for why such and such a thing happens, because you've got the metaphysic percolating on it in the back of your brain, then it's just like, that happens because this is a fairly easy thing to explain using the model I have going on.
So I'll just kind of quickly go over the rest of this, and then maybe we can take a short break and then get into some collaborative world building from my Nimbus region here.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. Yeah, you called it just the right time. I'm running relatively low on coffee again.
Excellent. So the way, this is very similar to D&D and a lot of other sort of planar structures, right? The interstitium is the rebrand of the gauntlet from Mage the Awakening. It's sort of that layer between the prime materium, and I have 3 interstitial planes. So the astral is the plane of spirit. Then the ethereal plane is the plane of mind. It's like the cognitive realm from Stormlight Archive.
Yep.
And then Reveris is the plane of sort of time and space and travel.
It's somewhere between kind of like the Astral Sea and Mechanus, basically.
Yeah. And then within this bubble, the inner planes, infinite elemental planes. So if you think of it, there's a plane for it. Basically, is the idea there.
There was the ages long joke about basically as an NPC I had in a Planescape campaign who's been scouring the elemental reaches for the para-elemental plane of rum.
Yeah, and that exists in Teramore, right?
It's like, I found it. I found it somewhere. Were you drinking that night? A little bit.
Yeah. The other joke that I've used before is, there's likely an elemental plane of doorknobs, right? If you think of it, it exists, regardless of how stupid it is. And so from there, basically, there's the inner planes and the outer planes, which is a pretty standard concept.
Yep.
The inner planes are things that influence and interact with the physical world, and are places that, through magic or wondrous items or artifacts, travel is, not safe and not easy, but possible.
Yeah, you might need to either get some interesting, like either magical equipment or be, warded up the wazoo.
Yeah. And then we have this barrier called the divinexus, which is a word that LoreKeeper came up with for me, which is quite cool. And that is the barrier between the inner and the outer planes. So the outer planes are all the planes that have to do with the gods. This is basically the inner planes are sort of the mortal realms, and then the outer planes are the realm of deities and gods, and the more esoteric concepts. It's not super fleshed out yet, but each of the gods has a plane that they've created. Some of them have two for the sort of heaven and hell dynamic. And the lore is that, and you never put impossibilities in world building and lore, but the lore is that it's without the direct involvement or assistance of a god, it is not believed to be possible to cross the divinexus.
Yeah. Without attaining an element of divinity or basically being permitted by something beyond it.
Yeah, so I'm sure one day I will run a campaign where people need to break into one of these godly realms and figure out how to do that, and that'll be quite cool.
Did somebody say heist?
Yeah, exactly, a heist of the gods. And if any of my players watch this afterwards, earmuffs. But my plan for that is not to actually come up with how it's done. I'm just going to let them struggle until they come up with something cool enough that I think it should work.
Ah, yes. The way I actually deal with puzzles.
Yeah, no, that's always how it's been. It's canon now.
Yeah, that's the way how I deal with puzzles. Normally, I'll go, right, here's something complicated. Here are a couple of things you can manipulate, and then go.
Yeah, I also do that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll wait till you come up with a cool idea, and then and then go, yeah, that's the right one. That's totally how that worked. It's always like that. Absolutely. Right. Do you want to take a quick 5-minute break and grab some grab another cuppa or something, and then we can knuckle down to throwing some ideas around?
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome. Righty-ho. I'm gonna pop myself on. Yep. There you go.
Well, that's the end of part 1. Tune in soon for part 2, where we'll actually be getting some world building done.